My sister appeared at my door in tears with 2 suitcases, but I chased her away. Am I right? Using a throwaway account here because my family monitors my social media closely. I'm a 26-year-old woman who has had no contact with my sister Cheryl, who is 24, and my mother, who is 57, since I turned 18. The root of this estrangement goes back to when our parents divorced while I was 14, primarily due to my mother's overt favoritism towards Cheryl and her dismissal of Cheryl's abusive behavior towards me. My mother rationalized her bias with the notion that every parent has their favorite, yet Cheryl seemed to relish in taking my belongings, destroying my possessions, and subjecting me to both physical and emotional torment. Despite my father's efforts through years of advocating for family counseling, mental health assessments, and family interventions, my mother continued to enable Cheryl's behavior, sometimes even appearing to encourage it. Viewing divorce as a desperate measure to salvage any remnants of my childhood, my father proceeded with it. During the custody battle, my mother fought for full custody of Cheryl in exchange for allowing my father to have me 80% of the time. It was a challenging period, but my father endeavored to minimize my time with my mother as much as possible. By the age of 16, I was living with my father full-time, only seeing my mother and Cheryl sporadically or during school hours. I've come to believe that my mother's insistence on having me 20% of the time was to maintain me as a target for Cheryl's aggression. However, once I gained the ability to simply walk away, Cheryl's hold over me significantly weakened. Interestingly, Cheryl had always been fixated on taking things from me. Whether it was a new phone or tablet, she felt entitled to it. Once I moved in with my father permanently during high school, her opportunities to steal from me were greatly reduced, though she never stopped trying. At one point, she even attempted to seduce a boyfriend of mine during high school, but he immediately informed me about it and expressed how uncomfortable it made him feel. Throughout my college years, Cheryl engaged in online stalking to keep tabs on my dating life. I had 2 boyfriends during that time, and she attempted to seduce both of them. Fortunately, they informed me about her efforts and rejected her advances. It's worth noting that despite Cheryl's conventional attractiveness, she has struggled with personal hygiene since her teenage years. She showers bi-weekly and attempts to mask her body odor with a mix of scented hand lotion and perfume, which only results in an overpowering and unpleasant smell. One of my college boyfriends even commented on being repelled by the state of her nails when she touched his shoulder. Additionally, Cheryl tried to fraudulently obtain a credit card in my name during my college years, but my father had wisely placed a lock on my credit to prevent such incidents, anticipating that my mother might attempt something similar. Needless to say, my opinion of both my sister and mother is far from favorable. Recently, I received an unexpected call from my Aunt Janice, my mother's sister, whom I hadn't spoken to in nearly a decade. She cryptically asked what I had heard, leaving me confused. When I expressed my ignorance, she revealed that Cheryl needed a place to stay because she had been kicked out by our mother. I immediately refused, bewildered by the request. Despite Janice's pleas for me to temporarily house Cheryl for just a few days, until things cooled down with our mother, I reiterated that Cheryl, my mother, and even Janice were essentially strangers to me now due to our long estrangement. Janice persisted with the argument that family helps family, but I ultimately blocked her number. Following this exchange, I received calls from confused cousins on my mother's side, surprised by my decision to cut off contact with my sister and mother as if it were a recent development rather than something that happened nearly a decade ago. These cousins rarely communicated with me before, so their sudden interest only added to the situation's perplexity. I'm contemplating whether to share the details with them or simply state that it's none of their business. Reflecting on the conversation with Aunt Janice, I wonder if I could have handled it differently. Am I the asshole for making it clear to my aunt that I want nothing to do with my mother and sister? First update. I had a conversation with 2 of my cousins over the phone, where I clarified that I've been estranged from my mom and sister since turning 18. Although I've been in their presence a few times since then, we never directly interacted. Following advice, I provided them with a brief overview of the events that led me to sever ties with my sister and mother. One cousin responded with, "Figures," while the other said, "Makes sense." Later, my aunt sent me a message on Facebook saying, "I had no idea it was that bad. although she did, and promised to stop pressuring me about the situation. This exchange left me feeling somewhat relieved as I started my Friday, but that feeling was short-lived. By noon, while my husband and I were working from home, we were startled by an alert from our Ring doorbell indicating someone was at our front door. Upon checking the camera, we saw it was my sister Cheryl, standing there with 2 suitcases in tow. Approaching the door, I made sure to keep the screen door locked while opening the main door. Even through the screen, I could detect her distinctive body odor, signaling that her hygiene hadn't improved since we last met. Cheryl attempted a cheerful greeting, pretending as if our troubled past didn't exist. When I asked what she wanted, she explained that she had a falling out with our mom but wouldn't elaborate on the details. She then requested to stay with us, to which I firmly responded, "Absolutely not." At this point, Cheryl broke down crying and claimed she had been having a 6-month affair with my husband, stating she felt compelled to reveal this because blood sticks with blood. Just then, my husband appeared and exclaimed, "Say what?" Cheryl looked bewildered and questioned who he was. It was almost comical because it dawned on me that she had no idea who my husband actually was. Since Thanksgiving, my husband decided to grow a small beard for the first time, marking a departure from his usual clean-shaven appearance in most of his social media photos. It's no surprise then that Cheryl wouldn't recognize him with his new facial hair. When I pointed out, "That's my husband," Cheryl attempted to backtrack, but it was a pitiful sight. I simply told her, "Bye, Cheryl," and shut the door on her. Despite her persistent buzzing on the Ring and knocking while pleading for entry, she finally gave up and left after about 10 minutes. I immediately called both of my cousins to demand an explanation for Cheryl's unexpected visit and to inquire why our mother, who always favored Cheryl, had suddenly kicked her out. One cousin had only a sketchy understanding of the situation, but the other was well informed about the details. The trouble began shortly after my parents' divorce, when my mother introduced a man I disdainfully refer to as Scumbag Tom into our lives. His arrival coincided suspiciously with the start of the divorce proceedings, and I always found his presence unsettling. Curious, I once asked my father if he believed Mom had an affair with Tom, to which he responded that Tom was the least of his concerns and hardly a priority in their divorce. As it turned out, Cheryl had slept with Tom, leading to her expulsion from our mother's house when the affair came to light. Meanwhile, Tom remained, claiming that Cheryl had somehow manipulated him into the liaison. It was just another example of Cheryl's lack of integrity, and it revealed the one line even our mother wouldn't allow Cheryl to cross. Reflecting on these events, I am profoundly relieved to have distanced myself from such toxic dynamics. Update 2. The past 12 hours have been an emotional whirlwind. Today, I had another conversation with my dad, inviting him over to share the recent antics of Cheryl. As I recounted the events, my dad's reaction was a mix of laughter, tears, and disbelief. Initially, I was concerned for his health, fearing he might be experiencing a medical issue. However, he eventually composed himself enough to reveal a long-kept family secret. During my parents' divorce, it came to light that my mother had been particularly vindictive, going as far as to claim that I wasn't my father's biological child. She threatened to use this claim to gain full custody of me. Unfazed by the possibility that I might not be his biological daughter, my dad stood firm, refusing to abandon me. Subsequently, paternity tests were conducted for both Cheryl and me. The results confirmed I was indeed my dad's child, but Cheryl was not. She was Scumbag Tom's daughter, the man my mother had brought in for testing. My dad oscillated between laughter and tears as he shared this with me and my husband. A heavy silence followed his revelation. When I inquired if Scumbag Tom was aware of this, my dad simply nodded. Curious about his feelings towards Cheryl, he expressed that one cannot simply stop loving their child, regardless of their actions. Later that day, Cheryl called me from an unknown number, desperately seeking help, either a place to stay or money for a hotel. Exhausted and harboring resentment, I decided to reveal her true parentage to her, hoping to inflict some pain. She responded with disbelief and pleaded for it to be a lie before I hung up on her. After sharing what I had done with my dad and husband, my dad resumed his mixed reaction of sobbing and chuckling. My husband suggested we inform my aunt about the situation with Cheryl, anticipating she might become unstable and ensuring someone would be on alert. Reflecting on my actions, I acknowledge the guilt stemming from using such information to hurt Cheryl deliberately. I rationalized it by comparing it to the pain she's caused me. But the satisfaction from revenge has diminished over time, leaving me with a lingering discomfort. Next update. Following the advice I received, I reached out to my two cousins for an honest discussion. It became clear that my mother and sister had manipulated the narrative within that part of the family. My cousins revealed that my father was depicted as a disreputable cheater, and I was labeled as a dropout and drug addict who jumped from one relationship to another, despite having only 4 boyfriends in my life. Consequently, when my sister was evicted, my aunt proposed she stay with me, under the impression that I was a transient drug user without stable employment. To reconcile this with my current situation, my aunt concocted a story that I had miraculously turned my life around in 6 months, getting clean, obtaining an online degree, securing a job, purchasing a home, and finding a husband. My cousins admitted they had always harbored negative feelings towards my mother and sister, assuming that if such individuals considered me undesirable, I must have been exceptionally so. I took the opportunity to share the truth about Cheryl and scumbag Tom with them, which they found appalling. They assured me that the wider family would be informed of the actual circumstances. I learned about the next series of events indirectly, which transpired late last night. Cheryl returned to my mother's house, leading to a significant altercation involving physical damage to property and necessitating police intervention. When the officers arrived, my mother attempted to have Cheryl removed. However, since Cheryl's legal residence was listed as my mother's address, she could not be forcibly evicted. The same applied to scumbag Tom. The police stated they could intervene only if an assault occurred. In response to these developments, I've started directing calls from unknown numbers straight to voicemail. Last night alone, I received 3 such calls. 2 from my mother, the first filled with tears and pleas for understanding, the second angry and incomprehensible, and 1 from scumbag Tom, which I deleted midway through his message. I plan to compile evidence from various sources, including doorbell camera footage, records of past legal issues involving credit card fraud, voicemails, text messages, and information from my cousins, to pursue legal protection against further harassment. It's become clear that distancing myself from this toxic situation is necessary. Last update. In my profile, I clarified the misconceptions about me to my cousins, who had been misled by my mother and sister into believing I was a complete mess, unreliable in jobs, promiscuous, drug-addicted, and homeless. When my sister Cheryl was evicted, my aunt suggested she could stay with me, which puzzled my cousins given their impression of me as a mess. To reconcile this, my aunt fabricated a story that I had miraculously turned my life around in 6 months, getting clean, earning a degree, starting a career, buying a house, and getting married. My cousins were initially skeptical, but reasoned that if my mom and sister, who they regarded as unreliable, were disparaging me, I must have been even worse in their eyes. This misunderstanding has since been resolved, and it turns out my cousins mostly wanted to avoid being drawn into drama. The latest development I heard from 2 cousins involves Cheryl returning home, leading to a major argument with my mom, which scumbag Tom also joined. The police were called, confirmed everyone's addresses, and stated they couldn't evict anyone without evidence of assault before leaving. Following this incident, I've been receiving calls from various family members. Calls from my mom, Cheryl, and scumbag Tom are being sent directly to voicemail, which I'm collecting for potential legal use. My husband and I are considering hiring a lawyer to manage this situation more effectively. My aunt has been expressing remorse, claiming ignorance of the extent of the abuse and believing my issues with Cheryl were merely trivial sibling disagreements. She advised against completely severing ties with my mom and Cheryl. However, aside from my aunt, no one else on my mom's side of the family has offered any support. Conversely, I've been receiving calls from cousins, second cousins, and other relatives on my mom's side who now wish to reconnect after learning the truth. I'm ambivalent about investing time in these relationships since they offered no support to my father or me during or after his divorce. I understand their detachment might stem from the false narrative spun by my mom and sister. Yet it's worth noting that despite recognizing my mom and Cheryl's questionable character, These family members maintained their association with them. I'm more inclined to reconnect with my aunt's children, the two cousins who reached out for clarification rather than pressuring me to accommodate Cheryl, since they demonstrated a willingness to understand the situation from the start. How do you like this story? Write your opinion in the comments. Let's get 1,000 subscribers on this channel. Love you.